Welcome back to One More Mana. My name is Derik, and today we are finally getting into a deck tech for Modern Horizons 2. Now, if y'all saw the top 5 Bruh cards video, you should already know how much I am just so in love with this set. It is amazing. Now, I don't know what it's going to do to Modern, from my understanding, it's going to make Modern super fun, but I am super ignorant and know nothing about Modern, so I won't speak on that part. But for Commander specifically, I'm really loving what I see. A lot of really interesting cards, and a lot of really fun looking cards. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I took all of my self-control. One of the last days, as I was getting all the deck lists finished and all the scripts and everything written, they revealed Titania, that we're getting an old border and an alternate art for Titania. And it took all of my self-control not to scrap all of that and immediately just start filming another Titania deck tech. Don't worry, I don't have that much self-control. Y'all are definitely still getting an updated Titania deck tech in the very near future, but I wanted to do something new first. I didn't want to just rehash an old deck right away. So I'm going to be going in a direction that I didn't think I would really find myself going for a long time, and that's with a Simic deck. Now, if I haven't really expressed it on the channel, I have I wouldn't say an issue. I don't really like playing Simic, I should say. It's a color combination I just don't find fun for myself personally. I've even found myself changing a lot of my personal decks, where a good example of this is my Kumena Merfolk deck. I actually changed over to Sig just because I felt like Simic was doing too much, even in a Merfolk tribal deck. So it's not a color combination I find fun to play, but with Lonis Cryptozoologist, I think that might change for me because I'm kind of feeling where this card's going. Now, if you want any of the crazy cards in this deck or just any of the beautiful things in Modern Horizons 2, we got fetch lands, we got lots of new cards, old borders, all these different treatments. There's about 30 different versions of each card. So to make it simple, just head on over to TCG Player and pick whichever specific version of a card you want. And if you use the affiliate link down in the description below, it'll help support the channel in the process. Like I said, TCG Player is amazing. Make it simple for yourself. Find those singles you want and they'll have anything you could be looking for. Now, let's just jump into Lonis. Now, Lonis is super interesting, and I really like, there's been, in recent times, there was a Salamander dude in Simic, and now there's Lonis, and I really like these interesting takes on Simic. Now, Lonis is just a blue and a green for a 1/2 Snake Elf Scout. I love when they got a bunch of creature types. It feels like it's Ikoria with just a bunch of creature types thrown in. And whenever another non-token creature enters, you get a clue. This right away is already kind of doing the Simic thing where creatures want to enter, you get a card advantage, all these different things, but it's doing it in an interesting way. Now you actually have to invest more resources to get that card draw. It's not, I know I like to shit on this card a lot, but it's not Chulane where it's just playing Magic all the advantage. You still need to take an extra step. So I really love how they kind of changed that design with a similar type thing. But the most interesting part of this card is you can tap it, sack X clues, and then target opponent reveals the top X cards of the library, and you can go ahead cast something with a mana value of X or less. Now this is, compared to typical Simic cards, extremely underpowered. The fact that you have to go through all this trouble of making all of these clues, tap it, sack it, just for the random chance to cast one single card. It's essentially a really inefficient version of Villainous Wealth, but I like that. We don't need, I feel like in Commander, we don't need more broken versions of Villainous Wealth. We don't need more broken versions of Simic Commanders, but different ones that do all these really cool things. Yeah, you're not going to cast your whole opponent's library, but there are going to be really cool situations, almost in a toolboxy way, where you need an answer. You can utilize this effect, just start digging through an opponent's library and try to find something fun to cast. And I love, really, I feel like the way this deck is going to play out. Now, you can use it in a few different ways. The clues themselves are such a good engine to have for card draw that honestly, just for getting the second part of this commander and just getting the clue production makes for a really good kind of shell for any Simic deck you want to build, because you have that built-in card advantage, even though you're kind of taking the extra step to get it. So that right away is awesome, but I did want to focus more, not so much on that. I want to focus on that second ability. I want to focus on making as many clues as possible, activating this ability basically every turn, and then just fishing through opponents' libraries. Because if y'all couldn't tell, my Villainous Wealth deck and my Scarab God deck are two of my favorite decks ever. I love playing with other people's cards, and I think this is another general that puts a new spin on it in a pretty fair way, at least on first take. Now, we'll start with the creatures because the creatures are going to be the bulk of this deck. I haven't done one of these, I feel like, in a little while, but this is one of those decks where you want between 35 and 45 creatures. You want a lot of creatures. And it's basically, like I've said in the past, you just need to find all of the things you put in other categories and find those with creatures. So for just a base example, instead of running a card like Cultivate, you want a Wood Elves. Instead of a Rampant Growth, you want a Sakura Tribe Elder. Little things like that. Instead of running something like a Disenchanter, that's in white, but the green version, I guess a Naturalize, something like that, you would run a Rex Sage or a Caustic Caterpillar. And you really want to find your removal, ramp, card draw, things like that in your creatures. That way you get the extra value, because it's never going to feel bad to cast a Cultivate, but if you get that Wood Elves, you get the clue in addition. It's almost like added text onto the cards. So we're going to go heavy into the creatures. I believe I'm approaching 40, but honestly, there's really not, you can never have too many creatures in a deck like this, especially because your commander's only 2 mana to start. You're basically always going to have access to it. So stuffing it as full of creatures as possible is a great thing. But 3 of the creatures I want to start by focusing on are 3 of the new cards that we got with Modern Horizons 2. Now, one is going to be Academy Manufacturer. This card seems incredibly broken. I can't imagine what this is going to do in other formats, because I feel like, you know, in other formats where food and stuff already sort of mattered, it's ridiculous. So basically, if you would create a clue, a treasure, or a food, instead you create one of each. This seems incredible, even in Commander where food really doesn't matter too much. That's basically saying with your Commander, when a creature enters, you get to ramp with treasure, get card advantage with the clue, and just for the hell of it, you get that food token. With some of the artifacts synergies we have, that could end up mattering. On top of that, you can gain life, which is never something that you want to do primarily, but just as a backup thrown on. This card seems ridiculous, and especially in this deck, you're going to end up with so many tokens on board and so many artifacts on board. It's going to get some of these other cards going. This is, I feel like, a kill on sight, especially in this deck. Speaking of kill on sight, Junk Winder. This card seems, it may end up being, it seems ridiculous because it's just a random uncommon. This card actually might end up being too oppressive, and I may end up cutting it from the deck list when I, playing the deck and see how it goes. Just because affinity for tokens, so you can just tap your clues. Tap, if you have obviously the Academy dude out, you can just go ahead, tap your treasures, everything else, and get this out for super cheap. And then every time a creature enters, you create a clue, and then when that token enters, you can tap something down and basically just freeze tap it. This can get really out of hand, because that just basically means every time you're playing creatures, you're freeze tapping your opponent's creatures. Now, typically in Commander, these aren't effects that I play a lot. I can't remember the last time. I think it was like a Nibblus card I used to play when I first started playing Commander, but that's about it. I could see this being incredibly broken in this deck and honestly oppressive, because it's just going to get to the point where everyone's creatures are just stuck tapped and they can't do anything. I want to test it out because I think it could also be really cool. It may be the type of deal where in Commander that effect just doesn't matter as much, because it's like Frost Titan on steroids, essentially. I mean, I generally love finding the weird uncommons and stuff that can be broken in certain decks, and I do want to give it a shot, but like I said, it may end up being too oppressive for me to actually have fun with. And the last new card of the creatures that I really want to emphasize is Wave Sifter. This thing's insane. You evoke it for 2 mana, you get 2 clues by itself, two clues by itself, and you get an extra one from your commanders for 3 clues. This is ridiculous. And throughout this whole deck, you just got to remember, these clues always represent card advantage kind of on the back end. I'm not going to really talk about it in terms of that card advantage because it's just there. I want to find other interesting things to do. But that by itself means they're always useful. And the fact for 2 mana you can get 3 of them, it really gets stuff going in this deck. And then the other category of creatures I love in here, and I won't name them all, but you'll see them in the deck list. I love that we finally get to utilize all the random Simic clue cards from Shadows over Innistrad. This makes me so happy. I love Innistrad as a block, which y'all definitely already know that. It's one of the spookiest, coolest in lore. Any chance I get to stuff a deck full of any Innistrad cards, I will always do it. And the fact that there's so many cool commons and uncommons and some rares from Shadows over Innistrad that really just never had homes because their only purpose was to make clues makes me just so happy. And there's not really a ton of them, but it's stuff like Briarbridge Patrol and Daring Sleuth. Obviously, Tireless Tracker is a very popular one. Little things like that. And even if it doesn't have a big effect, just the clue synergies and the fact that these cards really don't have homes elsewhere is enough for me just to want to put as many as I can into the deck. And there are just so many creatures. Definitely take the time. There's so many utility, whether it's a Spark Double to get 2 commanders or Adrix and Nev to go ahead and double your tokens. There's so many interesting creatures, so definitely look through the deck list one by one. I'd be here for an hour if I wanted to go ahead and analyze each creature in here, but definitely check it out. You have a ton of flexibility. It's just one of those decks, like I said, as long as you have creatures entering, they can just be whatever creatures you want. If they're getting ETB effects with your commander, you're going to get a ton of utility. But some that I really, really love in here, one is Shimmer Dragon. Shimmer Dragon, I feel like I have to emphasize, because the fact that you can tap 2 artifacts and tap 2 clues to draw a card is amazing. We don't want to have to sack our clues to draw cards because we want to keep our clues around to use with our commander. And anything we can do to keep them around and still get card advantage is insane. We're always going to have a bunch of artifacts out. This is just a great, great card in here. And then the last 2 I'll mention are, one used to be a boogeyman of the format. One is currently a boogeyman of the format, but I think in this deck they're relatively fair-ish, but I think they could be fun. I'm about to say some blasphemy. I put Urza in the deck. Now, this may be something I completely change, because one, when I'm actually putting the deck together, I don't want to spend all that money on Urza. So, like, yeah, probably won't go in the real deck. But if you have an Urza and you got tired of scaring everyone away playing it, this might be a fun deck for it. It basically just turns all your clues into mana rocks. You can then use this mana as a mana sink to cast your own spells. You get a giant construct, and the more I say all these words, you probably shouldn't put Urge in the deck. I think he's doing too much. So we'll see. If you want to be mean, and this deck doesn't seem very mean in particular, sneaking Urza in there, I guess. But you know what? The more I talk about it, the more I'm realizing this probably won't be in the deck list when you see it. But the last creature I want to talk about that used to be a boogeyman of the format, it's Eye Navigator. I feel like I remember when I first started playing Commander, Eye Navigator was like on the top of everyone's we need to ban this list, and I was terrified of it. I haven't seen it in so long, and maybe it's just because so many people won with it that it just kind of got boring. Maybe 6 mana to play and the needing the mana to activate just became inefficient in the format. I don't know what it is, but I feel like I haven't seen a Eye Navigator in forever. This deck is basically the definition of quote-unquote fair usage of Eye Navigator. We just want to get it in there so for 2 mana we can blink our creatures and go ahead and just keep getting clues. For 2 mana it's basically produce a clue, and with our commander you get late game, you can get in a situation where you just make as many clues as possible to activate it and fish as deep as possible into somebody's deck to see if you can get that answer you need. Seems pretty fun. You obviously can do more broken things with it, but I think this is one of the decks that, again, it has a quote-unquote fair usage in. And with the artifacts, Idol of Oblivion and Trading Post are phenomenal ways to go ahead and get card advantage out of our clues in other ways, and I love having that versatility of being able to use them outside of just the sacking to our commander or sacking to themselves. I love that. With the other artifacts, the 2 are just so important to me. One is Tamiyo's Journal. I love this card in here. It gives us clue production, and it gives us basically a more efficient way to use those clues. Well, I think the most fun way to play this deck is to make clues, use them with your commander, and then the randomness of seeing what you can get from your opponent's decks. Sometimes you're going to be in some dire circumstances, and it's nice to just have this sack 3 clues, which you're almost always going to have available, and go tutor for any card. This is going to be the type of deal where you can go tutor for a handful of cards with how much clue production we might have, and this is going to be, might be the most powerful card in this deck, because you can just go grab whatever, basically whenever. Obviously, you have to tap it each time, but there could be situations where you basically tap it on end step, tap it during your turn, and just back-to-back tutors go off. And I'm sure everybody's familiar. Back-to-back tutors like that can be incredibly powerful. And then the last one is a card that I was so excited to put in my Scarab God artifact deck, and a card that I'm so excited to put in any deck, and it's Inspiring Statuary. This card is incredible in here because, again, it basically turns our clues into pseudo treasures that don't have to sack because we untap them to cast our non-artifacts, and we don't run many artifacts in this deck. This might be the single deck I think that is best able to utilize Inspiring Statuary of any of the decks I've tried to put it in, because almost all our cards are non-artifacts, and we're going to have so many artifacts available. This is on the short list again with Tamiyo's Journal. I think the most powerful cards in this deck because it's going to ramp you like crazy. With the enchantments, obviously stuff like Doubling Season and Parallel Lives is so broken in this deck, but those are expensive as crap. They're super expensive. You're going to be able to make enough clues without those for this deck to run just fine. This is a great deck to put those in if you already have them, but I wouldn't say when you're looking at the deck list, don't let those make you hesitate. There's plenty of ways to just make insane clue production without it being doubled, and half the time they get removed on the spot anyway, so they're great to have, but definitely not necessary. But stuff like Ongoing Investigation, Trail of Evidence, Uvenwald Mysteries, Weirding Wood, those are necessary. I love these in here. It's more Shadows over Innistrad goodness for extra clue production. They'll be popping up on the screen as I'm talking, but they just reward you for just doing little things throughout the game and just throw more clues on the battlefield. Whether it's ramping you, dealing damage, casting spells, all a variety of ways to get clues, and in general, these being out there for you will have similar effects to those token doublers, because they're just giving you extra ways to do it, and they're a fraction of the price. With the sorceries, we have more Shadows over Innistrad goodness with Press for Answers and Gone Missing, and these aren't the best spells and they're not the most efficient, but I didn't care. Anything that said Investigate, I basically wanted in the deck because I just love having the dual utility, and I love that set, love the art, so I'm gonna force it in regardless. And the one sorcery I do find really interesting and kind of intrigues me is Echo Storm. This is one where we're going to be casting our commander so often because it's such a low CMC that if it dies, we basically always have access. Late game, this could just make a ton of copies of an artifact. Really, the worst case is just making a ton of clues with it, getting 4 or 5, maybe 3, 4, 5, whatever, how many clues. But you can also get copies of Panharmonicon or copies of Soul Ring to ramp you. It's an interesting card. I don't know how great it'll be, but I really find it intriguing with such a low CMC commander. And then with the instance, we got more Shadows over Innistrad goodness with Confirm Suspicion, Confront the Unknown. Oh, I love these cards. These cards make me so happy, and it's really the reason why I want to build this deck so bad. We do have some instant speed interaction. I said we want most on creatures, but certain things like Mystic Confluence I just love, so I want to put it in. Crossing Grip is incredibly powerful. So there are some non-creature removal and interaction we want, even though we want the majority to be in those creatures. I will say the card I'm most excited for is Second Harvest. just because this is just straight up double your clue tokens, which is incredibly broken. You can get into a board state, especially late game, where you have, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 clues, where you're thinking about digging deep. You use this, just have so many clues that you're almost guaranteed to get a good hit and really get something of value late game with your commander's ability. And then with the lands, 2 colors, always say it, tons of basics. You can just fill it with basics. There's very few non-basics we're really worried about. Reliquary Tower I would definitely run because we're going to be having a lot of access to card draw. You don't want to be discarding down a hand size as many creatures as possible as necessary. If you have access to a Manamo, it's a little expensive, but Manamo is phenomenal in here because you can untap your commander. That was the whole thing. You can really go heavy into untap effects, but it just feels like you want to be using all of your clues at once, not 2 here, 3 here, whatever it is. But having the access to the untap is really clutch just because it's on a land. And then the last land I want to talk about is Alchemist Refuge. This is a really, really good card in this deck. It's a little, I think it's like $5, $6, so it's a little expensive for just a land, but it's super powerful in this deck because so much of our interaction and really most of our effects are on creatures. One of the negatives to decks like that is only being able to play at sorcery speed, and just having a land that can give your stuff flash is really important. There's just going to be some times where we don't want to show our, basically, show our hand and just do everything on our turn. So it's really, really versatile. I would say of the 3 I mentioned, this is probably the most important one because it's just a great effect to have on your land. And that's going to do it for all the categories. Now let's get into the best part of every deck tech, and in this case, the clueiest, and it is the game-winning step. How are we about to win the game with this deck? Now, there's really some interesting ways to go. I want to start with just the primary way, which is kind of the most basic, but it's the way I would like to win with this deck the most. And the number one way that I would love to win with this deck is going to be with clues and just using your commander to sack clues and finding a Wincon from an opponent. Now, it's definitely going to be the hardest way to win just because you don't know what you're going to get, and it's not really the most efficient way to use these clues, to be completely honest. But I do think it'll be the most fun. I think the creature that really represents your best chance of doing so, I mentioned the Eye Navigator earlier, but Shrieking Drake is also one that's just, it's so good. Shrieking Drake is a card where you can get this out. You can basically turn all of your mana into clues where you're just bouncing creatures, playing creatures, and get into some cool things with that and the Eye Navigator, essentially, where you can just make as many clues as you have mana. And that's really powerful. And I think those are the kind of the board states you'll have to get into where you can make 15, 20 clues maybe over the course of a couple turns and really dig deep to find that Wincon from an opponent's deck. It won't be reliable. It'll be really risky to just use all your clues for that. But like I said, I think for me, that's going to be the most fun way to try to win. But we have some other ways to use these clues to win. Now, one that's going to be, I don't know how I feel about it. I think it's going to be a fun card to use because I've never won with it before, but we'll see how long it stays in the deck, is Mechanized Production. This is a really cool card where you can enchant an artifact, you make copies of it, and if you control 8 or more of any given artifact, you just win the game. Now, this is the beginning of the upkeep card, so your opponents do have a full round at the table to respond, and I think that makes it more fair. But it's a really cool alternate Wincon in a deck that isn't extremely, at least from my gauge of it, isn't going to be extremely broken or powerful or winning fast. So I think this is a good backup Wincon to have if really all else fails and you haven't been able to find any good stuff through your commander's effect. And then the other card that fits in this same game-winning category and utilizing these clues in a kind of a weird, obscure way is Rise and Shine. And basically, when you overload it for 6 mana, you can go ahead and turn all of your non-creature artifacts into 0/0s with 4+1 counters. So you just get a bunch of 4/4s. Normally, this seems really underwhelming for 6 mana, but because we can have so many clues, this can be, like I just mentioned, where you get into these chains, you get 15, 20 clues out. You just got clues for days. You've been saving them up. They've been sitting around. All of those turning into 4/4s can be extremely scary, and you can take out the table this way. So I find this really intriguing. I think this is a cool obscure card that really won't have many homes, so putting it in a deck like this can be a cool out of nowhere way to win the game. And now it is time for our weekly trip to Phyrexia. As you know, in a deck where we have almost 40 creatures, there is no better backup Wincon than Triumph of the Hordes. This is going to be a deck where it's relatively fair. This is not the primary way we're trying to win. We're not really trying to swarm the board with creatures as much as just get them in for value. I think the dream would be to play Rise and Shine and then cast Triumph of the Horde, so your clues become 4/4 creatures and then 5/5 trampling infect creatures. Because the concept of using an infectious 5/5 clue, just if that's not living the dream, I really don't know what is. And that is going to do it for this week's deck tech. I really hope y'all enjoyed it. If y'all couldn't tell, I really get so excited about anytime a commander is printed where we get to use all these random commons and uncommons from a past set. I love it because it gives people a chance to play with all these cards that make them happy, but in a useful way. I love Innistrad so much, and I love the art on a lot of these clue producing cards that really just never, I could always put them in decks, but they just never felt at home there, and giving them a home just makes me so happy, and I really feel like that's really what Commander's about. So I love that. what commanders in this set, because I feel like there's so much nostalgia, so many cool shoutouts and stuff. What commanders in this set make y'all the happiest? Let me know down in the comments below. And speaking of the happiest, Titania is coming soon, a Titania deck update. I'm going to try to incorporate as many new cards as I can to make it a little bit more fresh than just giving you the same old thing from last time. But Titania is reprinted, so you know I got to do a deck tech. Doesn't matter how much of it's the same, and I can't wait to do so. As always, a huge shout out to all the patrons. We love and appreciate y'all so much. Thank you so much for believing in what we do. Commander Petty is actually getting a slight schedule change. We're going to get more information out through Twitter and through our videos very soon. We're still going to be streaming on Saturdays part-time, but due to work schedules, we will be doing some streams during the week. So we'll keep you in the loop on that. But definitely once we get days set, come and check it out. Come talk that trash and come check out the Petty. It is always a good time. So much exciting stuff to come from Modern Horizons, especially Titania. But until then, I will see y'all next time.